Hi, I'm James Vowles and I'm here to answer your questions on the Turkish Grand Prix. It's a great question. One of the things I like about other series, for example the Le Mans 24 Hours, is you keep the car in exactly the same state as it finished the 24-hour race, as a memento. And for me, seeing the car covered in the confetti and the celebrations is just really the icon that really illustrates the thousands of hours of work that everyone has put in for this championship and the hard work being paid off. It's iconic, and I wish we could keep it in that state. As it turns out, that race car though has to do Bahrain twice and Abu Dhabi, so I think there's still someone picking bits out as we speak. The circumstances created in the Turkish Grand Prix qualifying are unique and haven't happened either in 2020 previously or for many years prior to that. You need both a freshly resurfaced circuit, which in the case of the Turkish Grand Prix that was done just weeks prior to us turning up, and you also need very cool conditions without much running on dry tyres so that the circuit can't grip up and change. On Friday, the lap times evolved by over 10 seconds to provide an idea as to how much that circuit was evolving, and it continued to evolve both in qualifying, even though we're on wet tyres, and during the race. The significance of that is that it's such a different circumstance to normal. The teams had to adapt very quickly to get the tyres working, to generate enough energy, to generate enough temperature. And we, for sure, were on the bad side of that compared to our competitors. Both Racing Point and Red Bull were clearly class leading in that circumstance, but also an FP3 Ferrari were there or thereabouts able to generate temperature. So if we go through qualifying step by step, it will highlight the issues. At the beginning of Q1, all cars were on the X-Wet tyre and doing multiple laps, and we weren't poor relative to the field at that point. In fact, both our cars were in the top 5. Verstappen, who went out on intermediate tyres, was almost nearly out of the session. But at the end of Q1, after multiple red flags, you saw the true extent of the problem. All teams, all drivers, had just one time lap on X-Wet to make it work. Verstappen's time was incredibly quick relative to our own. We just can't generate the energy and temperature in the tyres on one lap. Furthermore, whenever you see these big discrepancies between drivers and teams, not tenths, but seconds, it's not really traditionally car performance that's dominating this anymore. It's about tyre temperature and getting the tyres into the correct window. In Q2, it was a long run on X-Wet for everyone, and again, we were offset relative to Verstappen by 2 seconds. Not the differences we were seeing at the end of Q1, but even so, a large performance offset. And in Q3, Stroll did exactly the same run plan we did, with one time lap on X-Wet followed by 2 time laps on intermediate tyres after it was proving to be faster. And yet there was 5 seconds difference between the two teams. So if we dig into why, it is all about the energy that you're putting into the tyre, which the engine will produce energy as you turn and rotate the rear tyres and generate slip. The brakes will generate energy, both front and rear, and again that will go into the tyre. But obviously the ground is wet, and the rain is taking away energy from the tyres continuously. So it is all about putting more energy in than is being taken away by the conditions. The faster you are in certain parts of the track, the more energy you generate and the more temperature you generate. But where we were with our car in those conditions was offset relative to the leaders, so much so that we couldn't generate the performance required. We don't build a car for these conditions. We're building a car that works on tracks in a normal range of temperatures that we're expecting, be it wet or dry. And clearly we ran out of tools and authority to be able to change what we needed to in this occasion to generate tyre temperature. We don't have all the answers, but we are reviewing exactly what we would do now with a new set of components or setup changes should this circumstance appear again. It's unlikely to in Bahrain and Abu Dhabi, the 2 races, 2 circuits that are coming up towards the end of the year, but it's all likelihood could reappear again in the near future, and we need to be prepared. We had a question around the downforce and why it didn't help. Well, the truth is it did. The more downforce you have, the easier it is to generate energy on the tyres in those conditions. But the simple matter of fact is it wasn't enough to overcome the other energy losses that we were experiencing. So the more downforce definitely put us in a better case than some of the other teams behind us, but not to a sufficient level that it suddenly changed how the tyres were operating. On dry tyres, we have huge amounts of experience from previous circuits, and we're able to put that together and understand how it should perform at a new circuit. We don't have that same luxury on the intermediate tyre or the ex-wet tyre. We have the odd lap here and there from circuits where perhaps it's been a little bit damp, but what we need is sustained running in wet conditions in order to truly understand those tyres. The difference though is the intermediate and wet tyre haven't changed dramatically in the last few years, so we are able to use data from a few years ago, including Hockenheim 2019 for example, and use that to understand what we believe the tyres should be doing here. Clearly there's a lot more interpolation though on that data. We have a ballpark idea of where the pressure should be, what the temperature should be, but that's not enough to truly understand how that tyre is performing. So if we actually talk about what happens in an intermediate tyre, it may help to understand a little bit more. As the track dries and as you run an intermediate tyre, it starts to tear off the rubber that's on the surface. It starts with grooves that are there to clear water, but clearly in this case it was just a damp track. There was no water left, not sufficient that you need to clear it out of the way anymore. And you run it down to a slick. That slick is actually like a very low temperature soft tyre. If you will, it's a grippy, soft rubber compound that just works. Therefore, it's not a bad thing to run intermediates down. When you stop and you fit fresh intermediates, they'll come out the blankets warm and they'll perform well for a few laps. But how well they perform across the remainder of the run is really subject to how they wear in those conditions. And that can be tricky at times, which is what you saw with a few of our competitors, but not all. For us, it was clear that running them down to a slick was the key. We didn't have any further rain forecast on the radar, and actually that tyre would perform very well, and it did. It held on. In terms of reliability and where we're going, obviously in the wet, the energy is much, much lower. Clearly Turkey is a difficult track, but at the speed you're going at in these damp conditions, you're not generating anything near the loads we would do on dry tyres. We were comfortable that we'd be able to continue, but should we start to see issues or troubles or drop off from the tyre, we would have reacted immediately and come in with Lewis. The largest concern we had was actually heavy rain, or certainly rain forecast across the last few laps of the race. We could then, if you imagine we're just on slicks now, be in real trouble if the rain started to fall. Let's take the worst case condition. Lewis is going through turn 1. We have to do the entire lap in either light or heavy rain with tyres that are really fundamentally slick now. And that could have been an issue. That's one of the reasons why we called Lewis into box across the last few laps. We weren't concerned about the tyres making it to the end. We were just concerned about some rain that was appearing on the horizon. Fortunately, the rain didn't appear, and Lewis was able to cross the line and take his 7th World Championship. We had a decision to make with Vowles towards the end of the race, which is, do we stop and fit another intermediate tyre, or do we stop and try the dry, soft tyre in those conditions? There were a few issues. The first is that the track was still damp in places. There was still water in the stones. And we were on the difficult side of getting the tyres to work, as you saw from qualifying, and probably not ideal to be the first car to risk it. The second is that this is the sort of risk you make when you can make positions and points out of it. But Valtteri was 14th. He was a pit stop gap behind Gasly, who himself was a pit stop gap behind Kvyat. Everyone in front could have reacted to Valtteri, and we would have gained no positions as a result. So now you're introducing risk, which is that tyres don't work, so we have to do an additional pit stop, followed by the fact that we were struggling already for temperature as it is, and the gain would have been minimal or none, not even points. So to risk the car and to risk putting the wrong tyre on for no gain in terms of points is not how we would operate. When you go to a new track, you're not really too sure what the surface looks like, and it has a huge impact on what the lap times will be, how the track evolution will be, and how the tyres will perform. We didn't know, nor did any teams, what the track surface for the Turkish Grand Prix was going to be. Certainly, us and other teams, you could see us experimenting with downforce levels and how to get the tyres working on Friday. A clear indication that our normal level of simulation wasn't able to cope with the differences we were experiencing. You have to be a lot more agile and responsive to what you're seeing on track. So the tyres will work in a different way and the car will work a different way in terms of balance. And you're continuously tuning between runs, whereas perhaps another circuit, like Bahrain that we're going to, where we have a lot more information and data, it's easier to predict what will happen with the tyres and track. After the race, especially a wet race, you can see the car is covered in debris, dirt, etc. We do go around the car and take photos of all elements of it, and a video around the car as well. just to make sure we log and document it. But this isn't to understand aerodynamically how the car has been performing, it's to understand what damage we had and the state of the car at the end of the Grand Prix. Clearly, in the case of Valtteri, it was an essential piece of data that allowed us to understand how his car was during the race. He sustained damage after an accident in the opening laps with the Renault, and he also picked up a bit of that debris and it ended up in the barge board. But at the end of the race, we're able to document that and have a view of it so that we can in the future refer back to it, and our aerodynamicists can have a look and correlate the losses we were seeing relative to the damage that was visible in the car. Thank you very much for all of your questions. It's been a privilege and an honour answering them about such a special Grand Prix and such a memorable occasion. We now look forward to answering your questions after the Bahrain Grand Prix.